So welcome everyone to Design Systems Discussion. This is the second in a series of webinars that we're running here at Zero Height. And in these discussions, we're going to be inviting experts in design and design systems like we've done today. And we're going to talk through some of the issues that we face when creating and designing design systems. So the format of the webinar today is that we're going to kick things off with a few burning questions that we have here at Zero Height. And since we're hosting this, we're just going to go first, and then we are going to kick it back off to the audience. And and if you have any questions, you can write them down in the bottom of the Zoom panel. You'll see a Q&A tab, and then we'll have our wonderful team moderating, Luke and Kat, the questions. And then I will be passing them on to me, and I will pose them to the panel. So the chat is also open as well to everyone so they can take part. And please remember to treat everyone with respect, and we'll be moderating. So if there's any issues or any inappropriateness, we'll make sure to take care of that. But we're all good people here, so I don't think there'll be anything to worry about. And also, if you'd like to tweet along today or talk about it online, please use the hashtag #ZHWebinar. And as you guys already know, today's topic will be measurement. We'll be measuring the value of your design system because, let's face it, it ain't easy, and it's a major concern for a lot of design system folks out there. So today we have a lovely panel of experts, including Nathan Curtis, Maya Hampton, and Gabby Hahn. But before I let them introduce themselves, I should introduce myself. So hi, I'm the moderator today. My name is Katrina Dargell, and I am a design advocate at Zero Height. I've also been an instructor at General Assembly, and for the last 6 years, my background has been in UX design and research. But enough about me. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our fabulous panel who've been kind enough to join us across the pond in the US. So I'd love to kick it over to how about you, Maya? If you could introduce yourself first.
Sure. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Maya Hampton. I'm product manager for the design system for REI right now. So supporting the cross-functional team that's dedicated to building and running the system across our whole digital portfolio. Previously, I've worked in digital agency environments, so a lot of experience working with different types of teams, different types of UX teams, research, product development, really that full gamut supporting client projects. Excited to be here. Thanks.
Excited to have you. Nathan, would you like to go next?
Hi, my name is Nathan Curtis. I'm a consultant from a company, H-Shapes, that I own. We do workshops and talks and advisory coaching, but most of my time is spent working strategically or actually leading design system teams that are in-house as an adjunct member of their team for periods of time. I actually had the pleasure to work with Maya about 3 years ago for a short stint. And I've been doing the consulting on design systems for about 15 years. And my advanced master's degree is in statistics. So I love talking about measuring things, and I'm excited about being here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, that's great. And Gabby, we'd love to hear more about you.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Gabby Hahn, and I'm a design program manager currently at HashiCorp, working with the product design and specifically our design systems team. I've been in design ops for maybe 3.5 years so far. Prior to that, for about 18 years, I was a UX designer, working my way up as a generalist. You know, one of those people who does everything from soup to nuts, really. Excited to be here.
Okay, great. So I'd love to kick it off and just ask the first big question. What does design or what does measurement mean to you? And what are some ways you'd like to measure the value of a design system? Gabby, would you like to start?
Well, that is a big one.
If not, you can also hand it off. Sorry.
No, yeah, it is a big question. What does measurement mean to me personally? And I think, again, I'm going to be coming at things from a design ops perspective, which means that I'm looking at ways to support a team and drive success within an organization. So for me, measurement is about looking at outcomes and defining outcomes. Measurement doesn't have a lot of value in a vacuum. So unless you've identified the outcomes that you're looking for, you can't really track it. You can't really measure it. You don't know where you're going. So I'm really looking at it from awareness of the design system. That to me is something that should be measurable. Are people talking about it? Are people contributing? But it's really about the outcome that we're looking for.
Okay, great. Would anyone else like to comment?
I'll build upon what Gabby started with. I think starting with outcomes is great, because where do you want to go? And when you ask yourself questions, it's almost, what am I trying to prove? What am I experimenting with? How do we want to grow? And so outcomes can be things like solving a problem, or progressing a certain thing from A to B, or even creating value. But you really start with design systems wanting to be more specific with those things. And so design systems make stuff. How much did we make? How much did other people use? Are they happy with what they're using? And ultimately, did it impact the users, which is really hard to get at? Is their experience, the customers of the company's experience, more consistent? Is it higher quality? And even bringing it back into the business, are we doing it in an efficient manner? Are we actually minimizing costs to maximize the benefit of what we're trying to produce? And so you can get abstract, but really start to dig in specifically to what design systems make, how they're used, and so on, to create things that are more tangible.
Yeah, I'd agree with what both Gabby and Nathan are saying as well. And coming from it, treating design systems as a product as well, I think there's a lot of value in really going back to that value proposition and kind of measuring, are we delivering on that value? So as Nathan's kind of alluding to, there's those efficiency metrics. Are we helping teams become more efficient, get their work done more consistently? In addition to those quality metrics, are we putting out the best possible front end code? And do we have ways that we can measure that and track that across the site to reinforce that value proposition and why we're doing this in the first place?
Okay, that's great. I also just wanted to put my 2 cents in. But no, I agree with everything that you guys have said. And it's always important to not only consider how metrics are being designed within the internal team, but externally with the users, and how it's contributing to more productivity, efficiency, and communication between teams. And this also kind of leads me to the second question: is with some of the design systems that you guys have worked with in the past, what have been some of the key indicators of success? I'll just shoot this to Nathan.
So most of the time, teams start with, how much did we produce? Did we deliver the things that other people can reuse? And did we deliver it in a sufficient way? But ultimately, that then transitions into, did it get used? Because the real moment that makes people making design systems feel great isn't when you publish a documentation site and you have code packages on NPM and you have a Figma toolkit that you've now made available to others. Those are tangible moments you produce things. It's when it's actually on rei.com and you see those tokens flow through the experience, and you see color patterns, and you see buttons being used appropriately, and all those other parts that you make composed into greater experiences. And so that often is thought of as coverage. Is a term that's used in terms of, is it being used? Who's using it? How much is the system covering our product portfolio? And to what degree have we reached sufficient coverage to feel like we're successful in what we've done? So coverage often is measured in a lot of ways, but in Figma land, you can have analytics that measure how much your toolkit is covering everybody else's files. But more importantly, we see a lot of formality, and we can get into it around, how much is the code being used? How much is it, are they using the system to its full potential? And is there anything more that they can still gain out of the system that they haven't across, say, 40 products or 80 products, however big your ecosystem is?
Did anyone else want to comment?
Sure, I'll add a little more to that. Gabby mentioned awareness before, and I think especially starting out the system, that's a really big thing. It can be tricky to measure, but even just, how many people have we onboarded to the system, who's coming to our office hours or joining our Slack channel, is there knowledge about what we're doing? If we have a branded name, do people understand what that is, understand what a design system is? So I think that's really interesting initial metric. As Nathan mentioned, we worked with him with our kind of initial adoption of the design system. So we were very much looking at that coverage, adoption, over the years, we've really evolved that now to look at kind of that ongoing adoption of updates. So when we release new updates every quarter, our team's staying up to date with this system. Or is there still that interest in using what's new and what's coming out? Is there still that efficiency gain, that benefit to continue using the system that drives them to actually continue to update it as well? So I think that's one of those more maintenance kind of governance metrics that you can track over time as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you think about sort of the initial steps of a design system, the early days when you're just putting a team together and you're just sort of starting to spread the word, looking at qualitative aspects of it. And again, like Maya said, coming at a design system as a product. So you're looking at the user experience. And so initially that's going to be your internal users, engineering, designers, marketing, et cetera. It's going to sound a little bit strange, but level of confusion. How well are people understanding the messages around the design system, how you're explaining it? How well is that penetrating into people's minds? What are the same questions that you keep getting over and over again? Understanding how nuanced your conversation about the design system and your goals for it need to be is one of those sort of social political metrics that can be easy to overlook when you get sort of knee deep into code and deploying and all that good stuff. So that's the sort of thing that I like to look at in terms of measurement is, do people understand what we're saying? If we revise what we're saying, are we eliminating confusion or creating new confusion?
Yeah, if I could build upon that, I think Gabby's entirely right. There are things that are easier to measure, what we produced, and at least rudimentarily, how much are everybody else using those things. But then measurement gets really hard. And if you're going to invest in it, it feels like research, and doing quantitative things requires a lot of effort. But qualitative kinds of inspection of, are things more efficient, anecdotal evidence of that, are things more consistent? It starts qualitatively, and ultimately satisfaction, which I know Maya can talk a lot more about it than I can, starts with qualitative or quantitative simple questions, but really gets its value out of the qualitative responses that you're getting to inform sentiment and mood and problems to solve and so on. And all of those things start to become greater or more expensive to measure. And that's why design system metrics are in part really challenging, because you really have to invest a lot to get good, not just data, but learnings from those things to influence where you're going to go.
And speaking of qualitative versus quantitative metrics, I mean, I have my own bias, but in your experience, which one do you think is more important when measuring design systems? I know that's a loaded question.
It is. And I don't know that there's one answer, because it's sort of the comeback question to that is measuring where. Where are we measuring? Are we measuring internally, externally? But if we do think about it as a product, what matters most about the product is your users, whoever they may be, willingness to engage with the product, willingness to use the product. And so I think that quantitative helps. You can, track downloads, you can track how things are getting feedback in GitHub, code rework, all that kind of stuff. But until you take those numbers and go out and talk to people about what those numbers mean, that's where the value is. The words of the people. Yeah.
And I know that a lot of designers have had this in the past, but they've had trouble pushing qualitative data along with quantitative data. That's what a lot of C-suite executives want. Have any of you had any trouble with this? And how have you dealt with it regarding stakeholders? And how have you made stakeholders care more about qualitative data?
I find that qualitative data informs the storytelling you need to do to express the core value proposition, like Maya was talking about, and continue to reinforce that through your communications to your customers and your sponsors and leaders. Qualitative data helps us at least anchor those people. And I've found that leadership, although they often seek quantitative results, are very much swayed by qualitative findings and conversations enough to move the needle to reveal the value of the design system. I think qualitatively too, that helps foster understanding around the two core things that when people say, why are you doing a design system? The two bits of rationale that flow off of people's tongues immediately are, we want to be more efficient, we want to be more consistent. And oh my gosh, good luck measuring either of those things. Because to measure efficiency requires most of the time inspection of people's work habits and a confounding array of effects, their attitude, their skill level, all of the other constraints and priorities that they have, their existing code base that they're working with. And you can't tease out the impact of the system in a concrete way that's really statistically significant. And so, and measuring efficiency often is the result of or achieved by a controlled study where you have essentially a placebo effect of not using a system and an actual using a system to achieve the same outcome. And those things are expensive to set up, expensive to run. You run them on a few people, but I have seen that bridge then to an mystifyingly acceptable leadership metric of, okay, if we have now an efficiency scale, let's apply that to how much of our work is a proportion that's front-end development across all of our developers. And suddenly there's a base, like the CFO of a major corporation said, okay, we have now a formula that's pretty basic. We plug the numbers in and there's tens of millions of dollars of saving, kind of, sort of, enough. And suddenly the whole thing's funded and we get more money. And to me, I'm like, none of that's statistically significant and there's all sorts of compounding effects. So to me, those quantitative things that are felt quantitative are really qualitative, but they're helping to at least tell a general story to help them make a high level investment in what the program's gonna do.
Yeah, I would say the qualitative really adds the storytelling, like Nathan mentioned, to the quantitative aspect. You can get those numbers. It's really useful to get that baseline and to see those trends over time, but to add, the real impact to it comes from the stories. And, to the question about how do you get stakeholders to care about that, I found that tying it to other company goals can help tell that story as well. So certainly there's kind of the business outcomes, efficiency and all of that, but usually there's goals around like employee satisfaction and happiness and recruitment and things like that, that having a well-running design system and other operational teams like that can really support. And adding the kind of qualitative gives it that flavor. It gives you some good testimonials. That's the stuff that often really sticks in your mind a lot longer than just the numbers that come with quant. So I really do think they pair together.
And we've obviously been talking a lot about qualitative metrics and quantitative and their use, but how would you say that there are any bad metrics that aren't relevant to measure? Like maybe common metrics that people think that they should care about, but they really shouldn't?
I don't know that it's bad. Efficiency is the goal, but it's really, really hard to measure. And it confounds people because they say the primary reason we have is efficiency. We have no idea how to measure it. And I don't have a good answer for that other than, well, then measure other things that produce or link to value that still compel people to value what the system is. So to me, efficiency isn't bad to measure. It's just really hard, really expensive, and it confounds most teams on how to do it well.
Yeah, I suppose also depending on the resources and how big the teams are and how much of a priority the design system is, obviously things could get a little muddy around there. But in terms of, timings and I'm sorry, I'm switching up the topic a little bit. But yeah, obviously, I'm sure many of you have dove into new, roles and you are working on design systems. Maybe you started a role and they're already in the middle of one. So when should you start implementing metrics for a design system? And obviously the sooner the better, but is there a good time to start doing this? And if so, when?
It's exactly what you said. You should start as soon as you possibly can. And it's not even that you necessarily need to have everything perfectly mapped out, but start small. Start with, we're going to start having initial office hours to introduce the concept of the design system to the company or to our partners in IT. And then create a sign-up form so that you know who's coming, get ready for topics, just have something ready so that you can say, on our first meeting, we had 45 people from IT, 1 person from marketing, and 2 people from the design team. that is going to get you and your team in the habit of thinking about what you're tracking. And I guarantee you that the questions that come up from an office hours or a lunch and learn are going to help introduce new things for you to look at and measure. Initially, it's going to be a little squishy. It's going to be a little strange. Take the journey, trust your team. This really is something that there are, as we always say in UX research, there's no one true answer. It really does depend.
And I would just add that even if you were to join something kind of midstream and you don't have data coming from before, that's where Qualitative can really help fill the gaps and user interviews with designers and developers who have been using, the before the design system and kind of get a sense of how their workflow has changed, what they've benefited from using it so far, and start to fill in some of the gaps with that good storytelling.
I really like how Gabby projects have a target in mind of all the things you want to measure, but start small and perhaps start crudely with some of the things that you measure. There's one client I coached who had a developer have the time to canvas across every repository and had hooks to detect all the different types of uses like classes, component names, etc., of the system across every single product in their ecosystem, because they had a normalized architecture. But it still cost a lot. It was a job they had to run every month, and it was they had to really smooth the data. But oh my gosh, it was incredibly telling, because suddenly you could tell product manager 13, why is your design system 6 months old and why aren't you using it anymore? Like, why isn't your current work using it? There's an obvious detected signal there. That's incredibly complex and expensive. Or at least for him, he had the benefit of a lot of normalized architecture that made it less expensive. But for most design systems, let's back up. Like, let's create a spreadsheet. Can you create a spreadsheet that has all the potential adopters of your system as teams or even groups of your company? And for every one of those rows, you have a dev lead point of contact, a design lead point of contact. And yeah, it's a manual conversation you're having with all 40 of those rows once every quarter of the year to check in on how they're doing. I did that at Morningstar. And after about 9 months, we were 3 months after the initial launch of the system, we went to the C-level and said, here's the pockets of adoption across your portfolio. This group is really strong. This group's really weak. This group's really busy with other stuff. It's okay, they're not adopting. And they then oriented to say, all right, focus your attention on group 2. That's quantifiable in a crudely managed way. And it's the work of one person doing some manual stuff and using a spreadsheet to signal where the work is. So you don't have to have an engineer to build out all those things to still move the needle of influence and of where your scope and your investments are going.
Yeah. Some people I've seen in the chat have been asking about tools, and I just want to back up what Nathan just said. Spreadsheets are your friend. There are all kinds of fancy applications out there, Airtable, what have you, but at the end of the day, a spreadsheet is where you should always start, and it will probably outlast any app in the universe.
Oh, that's great. I was actually just about to ask if you use any tools to visualize your data and metrics, but I guess spreadsheet it is. Also, we are wrapping up the internal questions and opening up to audience in a couple minutes. So I'd like to just wrap up with one more question and ask, so how do you deal with internal communication when it comes to metrics? To whom should you share these metrics with? And does it have the most impact to push forward with the design system? I'll ask this to Maya.
Sure. Really anyone that will listen. So often it's, you're kind of tailoring your message to who you're talking to. So that's where you can kind of pull certain metrics forward and figure out what they really care about. And maybe that's where you surface some more of the quant versus the qual data. Personally, we have a quarterly planning cycle. So I'm always reporting out on some of our measurements as part of our OKR lookbacks, keeping in touch with our stakeholders so that they're aware of things like adoption usage, where we're seeing gaps in coverage, where we're seeing gaps in people staying up to date as well and seeing those opportunities. I'd say really we also though use the measurements we see a lot for our internal team. So it helps us get a sense of what components people are using, what they're not using, gives us some points to follow up with our users to figure out like, hey, we released this new, table, and we see that you're still using this outdated table that we deprecated, 6 months ago. Can we talk about, is that just a timing constraint, or is there something that we're not delivering there? So it really helps for us to get a sense of, how people are using the system, some points to follow up with them. And a lot of times it validates what we hear anecdotally. So it's just kind of nice to get some numbers to back that up as well. So we use internally, both with our team as well as our stakeholder groups.
I almost group them into 3 types of communications. One of them is sort of the automated things you can incorporate into your general documentation and communications. That first example that I was talking about of the engineer who was canvassing all the repos, they had a tab on every component page that spoke to the places it's used, the age of each of the uses, the places where it's deprecated, and all these signals publicly visible to everybody in the entire company. And so that's really automated and integrated into the practices that they have. The second would be the kind of initiatives or missions, or if you're using OKRs, the objectives and key results you're using to track against those objectives, and how that is infused in your regular communications to your adopters and just as a program. Here's where we're going, here's how we're tracking and getting there, here's what you might anticipate in the next period. And then the third is a lot of the more private or more opaque stuff to the community, but it's the things for your leadership to talk about the objectives and the team and the productivity and the sort of investments that you're making that not everybody needs to see. And that's okay, but that still takes a considerable amount of effort to produce and track.
I think one of the things that usually surprises people is how political design systems are. Political in the sense of people who don't even think that they have an opinion about a design system, be it, a button, a drop-down menu, have all kinds of opinions. And so again, if you're thinking of it from how do you support your design team, you want to make sure that you are not allowing them to run headlong into a brick wall because you want to support their success. So I think it's about quietly, again, if you think about it from the initial start of a design system, quietly working with the team to come up with, here are the things that we want to track initially. Share that with your leadership. If you're in design, share it with design leadership. If you're in IT, share it with your IT leadership, and get a sense for, hey, who are our stakeholders? What do those stakeholders care about? Do what those stakeholders care about align with the list of things that we think that we want to measure? And then you can start to come up with plans for how you want to start gently introducing measurement and the sort of favorite topics for each of those stakeholders. Measurement is ultimately about building alliances and finding people to champion your team's work and the design system as a whole. It is a very slow, sometimes agonizing process. But again, if you just come at it from a sort of a UX perspective of, I want to understand you, we want to achieve something together, how can we make that happen? I think sometimes going back to those first principles is really just sort of the best start.
Okay, that's great. I fully, and I mean, just listening to you guys and all of your feedbacks really enlightened me a lot about how to approach measurement, and not only that, but making sure that in the center of it all, it's just a lot of communication between teams and how to really just show the value by, qualitative, quantitative metrics, and really just showing how creating something like a design system really helps push companies' agenda forward. Anyway, as we're wrapping up the internal questions, I'd like to take this moment to start reaching out and reading some of the audience questions. So this is the first question from Jay Smith, and they say, "Are measurements?" Sorry, let me just read this. I'm reading this verbatim, so give me a second. "Are measurements that keep the system funded the same as what keeps a system team motivated?" I'll shoot this to Nathan.
I don't think so. For example, one of the measurements that kept the system funded at one company was, will it make our experiences more accessible? Yes or no? And boom, we're funded for like a year because that was a problem that was very painful for them that they used the system to essentially try and address to a varying extent. I also think that the motivations for business outcomes are different than the motivations for your adopters, and those are different than the motivations of the people making the system. And so you have lots of different incentives going on and different people wanting, like Gabby saying, opinions about buttons. There's lots of opinions about what people want out of a system that are very divergent. And a system that's successful often is addressing all those different kinds of dimensions to varying degrees. And so, yes, I think the answer to Jay's question is yes, no, they are different.
Okay, and let me know if anyone else has another comment, but I'm happy to shoot another question out there. So one of them from the audience is, any suggestions on how to measure the impact of design systems through the lens end of the customer experience? And this was an anonymous question. Gabby?
That's a really good one. And here it comes. It depends. So what if you are in a product-centric organization, and I know a lot of people aren't, people are still working on project-based, but if you're in a product-based organization, what are some of the key pain points that you and your product teams are already aware of for customers? Do any of those pain points align with things that you're trying to improve in the design system? If so, start thinking about how, let's say you've changed an aspect of registration for a product. Okay, can you go out and start doing some basic usability studies with before and then after, when you've launched a new element of the registration process? Again, don't try to eat the entire cake. Slice off a little bit of cake and then go from there. Eventually you will get around to the entire cake. It's just going to take a little bit of time.
As with building most products. So our next question is from Steve Dennis, and they ask, in my experience, robust metrics can be difficult to get at without engineering resource. What ways to measure or estimate value have you found to be the most useful in getting initial buy-in for resourcing a design system before you have engineering resource available? Maya?
Yeah, that's where it gets tricky getting those numbers to like coverage and usage of certain components. But if you're really looking at that initial buy-in, that's, I think, the opportunity to really go qualitative and just go talk to people, build those relationships, figure out, where those opportunities are, make a spreadsheet, keep track of where, what teams can use what, start figuring out where those technical constraints are and get a sense of what those potential blockers are going to be towards whatever you're trying to measure, or even the measurement itself. And I think, again, if you can start to create that story around, these are the outcomes we want to deliver, we don't have a great way to track that, but if you want to see those numbers, then we're going to need some engineering resource to do that. So it starts to help tell that story to fund your team more to get that data, if that's what your stakeholders are looking for.
I build on that a little bit too, to say routine ways of doing a health check conversation with adopters of a design system is something that I do sometimes in my consulting, and I'll bring in, or I'll have a conversation with a designer and a developer from the same team, and I'll just ask them, how's it going? And I'll ask them fairly open-ended questions, but then I'll also weave in questions around, do you feel like you're done? And I had a conversation recently where the designer and developer said, we've actually adopted about 80% of what we expect to. So look at this little face pile of all these pictures of the users that have written a comment on the article or something. We built that one ourselves. We haven't swapped out the design system face pile to use that yet, but we expect to. I said, oh, okay, so you're going to do that soon. They said, yes, within about another month or two, we expect to be about 95% done with anything we could use the design system for. At that point, we'll be virtually fully adopted. And I ended the conversation with, I'm really glad you're at 80%. 95% is awesome. And also being able to go back and say, for that particular important product, they're 80% and they're going to be 95% in 2 months. They're really healthy. They're not a problem to solve for us right now. Or there's not a lot of incremental value we're going to be able to serve them with to move the needle in general.
Okay, great. And our next question is from Tyler Cashton. Please excuse me if I mispronounce that, but and he asks, is there any value in staffing a research role specifically in the early foundation of a systems team to spearhead measurement and of all things research? Or is that more the job of the PO or PM until the team matures to a point where it requires an additional headcount?
It should be a partnership between, product and UX research, absolutely. And if you can pull in engineering partners, please do that. Because I think, as we've all stated, the value of being able to share verbatims from internal and external customers changes people's minds about things and helps them grow and develop. And I have seen, for various types of research, verbatims bring over a less than enthusiastic potential stakeholder over to, yes, I want to fund you and support you all the way. So it should be a partnership, because again, user research is bringing one aspect, one point of view to things. But again, product does have that sort of specialized knowledge that it can share and add that nuance to the work. So it should be a joint effort. It would be fantastic if we could all get to the point where we have, dedicated research headcount for our design systems team. I think we're probably all, as a practice, a little ways out from that, but that would be awesome.
Yeah, I think a lot of design system teams start pretty small and scrappy. So it's, almost everybody's job to be doing this work. And then in my experience as well, the product manager can often help fill that gaps before you get to an ideal state where you have, fully dedicated resources like a researcher to help plug that in.
Yeah, I would reiterate that too. It starts with Maya's discussion of treat your design system like a product and think about all the distinct responsibilities or skill sets you need to make that product successful. Accessibility specialist, content strategist, let's be honest, QA, testers, all of those are not typically part of a core team that establishes a design system in most places. And so you have a skill deficit across your team that often designers, perhaps like Taylor, or developers, feel like they want to fill themselves, and they might not have the skills, or more often the skills and the time to do well. And so a product manager is more often on other product teams responsible for all these kind of measurements. That's part of their job. But also having access to specialists, most often researchers, is a great thing. And I agree with Gabby that I don't see anywhere except for massive, like Google material level design systems, researchers being allocated fully to a design system. It just doesn't happen for 98% of the rest of us.
I think you all make some really great points about incorporating a researcher on the design systems team as well. I have a research background, so I always find, like what Gabby said, having verbatim quotes from people directly and how certain things are improving them really help push the needle forward. But we're talking a lot about how beneficial design systems are and what kind of metrics we can use to influence people to adopt it and use it. But have you guys encountered any situations where teammates do not design the design system in spite of communicating its benefits multiple times? And if yes, how do you deal with it? That was a question from Rupali. Hopefully I pronounced that right.
Yeah, it happens. It's not ideal. I think, your goal is always going to be 100% adoption, and you're rarely going to hit that 100% mark. I think, again, just going back and talking to those, talking to, if it's a designer, was there a certain reason that they needed to either to kind of break the component or build something custom? A lot of times that'll stem back to an ask from their PM or their business stakeholders. And so trying to figure out what the root of that is it something we could support in the design system in the future? Or, is this just somebody that, has a charter to do something a little bit different and do a little more innovative? So, I think it doesn't hurt to have those conversations. If it's a designer, have another designer reach out to them and see if there's some way that we can kind of support them. I feel like those one-on-one conversations can really go a long way in making them feel like, hey, maybe they just didn't know this was available, or maybe they didn't quite understand how they were supposed to be using it. And so just having those conversations can a lot of times uncover the root of that resistance. And if it's, a personal choice or if it's something that they've been kind of directed to do for, you know, a specific reason.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the tricky part is that I don't think any of us want to see our design systems teams become enforcers of the design system, because that puts them in a terrible, awkward position where it makes it harder for them to build those alliances and to encourage people to use the design system and for them to articulate the value for the entire company and its customers to have this design system in place. So return to first principles. Think about it from a user research perspective. No one is out there trying to undermine the work that the team is doing, really and truly. People are doing the best that they can. So yes, absolutely, as Maya said, have a one-on-one conversation with the person's manager. Again, maybe just do it as a team so people don't feel necessarily targeted. Depends on your culture. You might want to bring in an intermediary, but again, you want to sort of bracket the design systems team to doing the design systems work and have maybe a design ops function step in and talk about, hey, we want to understand how you're working with the design system. How's it going for you? Have you had any difficulties? Have you, had to invent things on your own? Come at it from a gentle, let's work together perspective.
I really like that. A principle I often use is favor community over control when you're trying to make design systems successful. I do want to circle back to a comment Maya made where obviously the goal is that everyone completely adopts your design system. And I often find myself counseling teams that that's an unrealistic goal. Don't even frame expectations that way. Create proper boundaries and expectations that adoption will be incremental within a product and across products on your portfolio. And if you think about Google and Material, and they went public with Material in 2014, Google Search, priority. Google Maps, priority. Google Drive, not a priority. Google Calendar didn't become Material until 2018. Google Santa Tracker actually became Material around 2018 or 2019. That's awesome, but that was not their priority from a business value perspective. And so as you look across your product portfolio, you're going to have to make tough choices around where design systems invest their time and how they know the proportional value of their focus in different customers that they have is going to be really important, and that they won't necessarily achieve 100% adoption across everything necessarily.
Okay, and then we have our next audience question from Frankie DeGrave. So it's quite meaty, so I'm going to read this out in bits. So we're migrating from X products using a library like MUI or MUI.com to a proper organization-wide design system. I was thinking of measurements like how much time would it take for you to create these 10 components? But since each product is already using MUI, that answer would be skewed since they would say, well, that would be pretty fast, but they don't take consistency across the organization and scope. Does that make it a bad metric, and how would you tackle this?
I'd ask yourself, how long does it take for a designer to create a button in Figma? You know how long that takes? About 5 seconds if you know how to use Figma well. But that doesn't necessarily mean you have a high quality, robust, reusable, scalable, and durable button component. And so there's a distinction between making something fast and making something at a minimally sufficient quality. Design systems have to check a lot more boxes for a lot more different types of customers than an individual product team will have boxes that they check for only themselves. And so you have to think about those dimensions when talking about the scalable value of what something is that you make in a system.
Okay. Any other takers? No.
Yes, I would. Well, I could just add, going back to like why are you migrating to making your own custom in-house design system, and then following that up with, it can't just be to make it faster, or else you probably keep using maybe an out-of-the-box system. So seeing if there's an additional metric to that kind of time efficiency one that can help you check back in. Are we really delivering on the goal of using and building our own custom design system?
And generally, we've been speaking a lot about metrics and understanding the value of them. And obviously, it always depends on, your company's goals internally, externally, and, certain metrics that they're looking for. But one of the audience questions from Kyle Markel is, do you have any examples of key performance indicators that you've used in the past that have worked well for you? And the challenge being that they must include numbers and a time frame to be an actual KPI. Gabby?
Uh, well, I sort of deviate from that because, as I think we've all sort of stated, is that it takes a lot of investment of time and people effort to get to hard numbers. So maybe if it really does, if you're in a place where you really do have to get numbers, then make it simple. Can you track numbers around lunch and learns? Can you track numbers around office hours? Can you track numbers around evangelizing sessions that you've had with stakeholders? Again, that if only to just get you and your team into practice of being able to track things numerically. But I know it's a tough sell, but I would, because everybody wants quantitative numbers because numbers are great and all that. I would actually drive you toward a series of books that longtime information architect Christina Woodkey has written about KPIs and OKRs. I think that she frames them really intelligently. So I would check that out, and it'll help you think about writing your OKRs differently.
Okay, that's great. Any resources are always helpful for this. I know I read a ton of all of your articles on measurement. Also, I'd like to add another audience question. So this is another one from Steve Dennis. What metrics are you most proud of successfully getting implemented in a system? I guess this is speaking from past experiences. Maya?
Yeah, this is, I feel like we kind of touched on this earlier, but a lot of times, like I think Nathan mentioned, like the business outcomes is not necessarily what motivates the team necessarily. So great, teams are working more efficiency, that, it feels good. We're solving pain points about that. I think in personal experience, it's some of those adoption metrics. In our case, we didn't have a great before picture. So there was a lot of work that went into even figuring out what this landscape is. What is adoption going to look like? Who are we talking to? Who are the players in each of these? So getting that all together was a pretty significant first step. And then having that has made things a lot easier. And then it gets really kind of rewarding over time to see the increased adoption and the increased excitement about things. So I suppose that would be one of something that I find kind of personally motivating, and I think on our team finds it as well, to see that other teams are using it and are excited to use it, and we have a way to see that we have some visibility into it, and we're not just feeling like we're kind of working in our own little bubble or something like that.
I would say I want to reform the question to be, what have I been most impressed by any of the teams I've ever consulted with? And by far, I was blown away by that engineer that built those mechanics to know exactly where the code was being used across the entire company. And not just that, great, you wrote a script, it dumped out a bunch of data, you can create some graphs, but suddenly my ability as a presumptive product manager mindset and helping them was, I now see how you're penetrating third and fourth business units. I now see how that growth is happening over time. I now see all the signals of where the system's starting to age in particular products that are important. And I now see how you are shepherding your customers, not through adopting the design system, but changing or upgrading to the next generation of the design system. Because you see that wave of the new stuff being used and the old dependence on the old stuff going away, but still as a trickle that you might need to support and make business choices around when do we stop supporting it. All those metrics inform choices and decisions that the team can make to route the system in a different strategic way. And I was just blown away. The engineer was like, it's all really cool. And I'm like, you don't realize the strategic power that all those numbers now have. And it unlocked a lot of conversations.
Well, in terms of adoption and having, I mean, it's awesome that you were able to work with someone who was able to even measure and track all the code. I guess this is just something I'm a bit curious about in terms of adoption and metrics. And you mentioned this earlier that I think one of the companies you worked with, you had 80% adoption rate. So what would you say is the percentage that needs to be used, and to what extent for, I guess, adoption to really measure like how much value it's really providing to your team internally and externally? Like, sorry, does that make sense?
It does kind of like, and I want to break it down into a very crude rule of thumb that feels maybe a tad inappropriate for all this quantitative talk. But rule of threes, how satisfied will our team feel when we get 2/3 of our potential adopters actually using the system, or 2/3 of an existing experience or now being overlaid as a part of the system? Kari from Airbnb gave a talk at the Design Systems Conference in Helsinki in 2018, where he talked about Airbnb and how they measured the coverage of the system components relative to what they called team components based on screen real estate. They were like, we're at 70 or 80% for this product coming from the system, and only 20% they're having to build custom themselves. And suddenly they knew the dials, and I was like, 80%, oh my gosh, that would be awesome for so many of our adopters. And so that sort of exceeded that threshold of 2/3. And so that might be a rule of thumb that's useful for your team to feel sufficient energy and setting goals that are realistic.
Yeah, actually, 2/3 is a great, I think, metric for anything, especially when design systems are, I wouldn't say relatively new, but just difficult to get everybody on board. If there's different tech stacks, maybe the documentation isn't done well, so not everyone fully understands what all the components are made for. But, you know, a lot of people are asking for your favorite metrics or measures. We've talked a lot about that. Do any of you have a go-to metric for senior leadership that you use for spinning up a design system, an old one versus a mature design system?
I think for all the talk, it's adoption still continues to be kind of our go-to metric. And as I mentioned earlier, there's that initial adoption, and then there's the ongoing adoption. And then once you can have some more robust measurement, you can get a better sense of coverage across the website. And via that adoption metric, that number, you can infer a lot of great stories about the impact that's having on the end user experience, how you're able to deliver, you know, a more consistent user experience to those end visitors that see that. And you're able to really articulate some of those other benefits of the design system beyond just, are we using this? But by teams using this, here's all the other great stuff that comes with it as well. So I think adoption is one that there's a lot you can really get into there, and you can really evolve it over time, from tracking, you know, that initial buy-in to continuing to adopt the system.
There's a certain amount that you can control as a design system, how productive you are, and to a great extent, how much other people use your stuff, all those internal adopters. And the rest of those things, satisfaction, consistency of the experience, the quality of the experience, you can at most indirectly measure the impact that you have. You're talking about a degree of separation that really untethers your ability to control things, because all of those things in part come through the act of composition, usability, performance, accessibility. The design system isn't a direct controller of that. And that's why I think the adoption that Maya's talking about tends to be the anchor that drives a lot of the conversations as a result.
Yeah. If you're talking about what metrics get the attention of senior executives, senior leadership at your company, then yes, adoption is going to be certainly one of them. It's something that is understandable, particularly in the context of thinking of it as a product. But again, in the wonderful vein of it depends, is when you're trying to build alliances and get support throughout your organization, it's very important to understand what's the company roadmap for the year, what are the company OKRs for the year, what is any particular senior leadership person very much interested in, what's on the horizon, anything that you can do to find ways to track whatever a senior leader is interested in to what you're focusing on at a given moment with your design system, or tracking it to your own design system roadmap, that's always good as well. They may be a little squishy. Everything's a little squishy in the beginning, but just start having those conversations, understand from the senior leader, what that person is looking to measure or understand better. Just start the conversation.
So I'm going to, that's a perfect segue to the last question. I'm going to start wrapping up as we only have a few minutes left. So on the flip side, how comfortable should you be about stakeholders saying they don't need metrics or measurements for the design system? They just want it. Is this a big red flag? And this is from Anonymous. Nathan?
I don't know that I'd call it a red flag. I'd say, wow, I'm great. We don't need to make the case with you. Let's get to work. But I think I'd also still want to ask a lot more questions. Why? Really dig into the rationale, the incentives they have, and what outcomes they're really trying to achieve as a part of the design system before I really get a good sense of whether that's going to be a great fit for them.
Yeah, any senior leader at some point is going to be asked for numbers, measurement, tracking. That's just part of the role. So, hey, it's great that you are totally behind us and you want us to get this going. We're thinking about looking at how to track X, Y, Z as we move forward in the next quarter. Is that something that aligns with your goals? Oh yeah, sounds wonderful. Would you like us to bring you a report on that? Would love to see it. People have opinions about things they don't know that they have opinions about. People have needs that they may not be thinking of in the moment that they're talking to you. So you gotta dig in there. You gotta do a little research, wiggle things out of them, and help, because you're doing a job of helping them be successful as well. You're helping them.
Yeah, I guess that would be like an ideal scenario if you just have buy-in from senior leadership, but fair enough. So now that we're coming towards the end of the discussion, I'd just like to wrap up by asking you, each of you, if you have any advice or recommendations that you'd like to share with anyone regarding your experience with measurement or just in work in general. Maya, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of great stuff in the conversation today already, but just start something. Even if you don't feel like you have the resources, have a conversation with people. Don't be afraid to reach out and get that qualitative data. It could really serve you in the long run. It can be your baseline information. Just kind of get started doing it. Try different things and see what's interesting, see what sticks with people. Different people that you talk to are going to care about different things. So it doesn't hurt to get a range of stuff out there and see what you can learn about how people are using the system and what they're getting from it.
Okay, great. Gabby?
I think the key is to over communicate. If you feel like you're talking anyone's ear off about the design system, its status, the goals, the roadmap for it, just keep going. Everyone has the ability to pay attention at different levels at different times. And there's a lot of things about a design system that are really quite nuanced. As we've talked about earlier, it's a political football sometimes, depending on your organization. Keep talking to people. Even if you feel uncomfortable doing it, that's probably a good sign. It's going to save you a lot of time in the future. So just over communicate, be clear, track how people are reacting to what you're saying, and make tweaks as you go.
I think I would focus on some basic questions. Who on your team, if you're a leader or a teammate, who on your team is really going to be able to do this and is interested in doing this and has the space and time to do it well? And then what should they measure? And the problem I see with people answering the what is they say vague things like, is it making us more efficient, as opposed to how much time did this person save trying to create this down to this? You know, how specific can your questions be that you're trying to answer? And then how do you do it? And start with a spreadsheet. Start with how you model the data that you're either collecting or modeling the kind of form of the outcome that you want to present, and be able to build what you're starting to measure, even if manually at first, to really prove whether or not you're measuring something that's good.
Oh, that's great. Well, I just want to say I've had a really nice time chatting with you guys about measurement and design systems, and I feel like I've really gained a lot of knowledge and useful tips for the future. It's just getting on 5 now, but I just wanted to thank you so much to Nathan, Gabby, and Maya for joining us today. Thank you for all the attendees for listening and coming along and participating. We are going to upload the video in the next few days and send an email to all the attendees to let you know that it's live. And we'll also be writing some key takeaways from the discussion today, turning it into a big post. So keep an eye on it on that for zeroheight.com/blog. And make sure you follow us on social media so you can know about future webinars and events. And I just want to say thank you again, Gabby, Nathan, and Maya, so much. It's been so wonderful chatting with you, and I'm so happy that I could take an hour of your time. So yeah, have a great day.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Great, thanks, guys.